Hello, this is Tony Heller of RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. On this date in 1933, there was an incredible heat wave in the eastern half of the United States. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and discuss why it's important. These were U.S. temperatures on June 7, 1933. The red dots are above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the purple dots are above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see that almost the entire eastern half of the country was above 90 degrees. It was 106 degrees in Pipestone, Minnesota that day and 100 degrees in Chicago, and the average maximum temperature for the whole Midwest was 93 degrees. That's about 20 to 30 degrees warmer than today. This graph shows the percent of Midwest stations over 95 degrees on June 7th, going back to 1895. You can see that 1933 had a huge spike. More than half of the stations in the Midwest were above 95 degrees that day. This was the official U.S. Weather Bureau report, and it showed 100 degrees in Chicago. And it was not only hot during the day, look at the low temperature in Chicago that night. It was 76 degrees. Now compare that with today's forecast in Chicago. Their high temperature is 68 degrees compared to a low temperature of 76 degrees in 1933. So in 1933, their low temperature was 8 degrees warmer than today's maximum, and their maximum temperature in 1933 was 32 degrees warmer. Horses and hogs were dying by the hundred. Unseasonable heat brings death of animals on the farms. Here's another paper from Mattoon, Illinois. Heat records shattered. Torrid rays beating down on Midwest. Almost the entire country sweltered again today under a scorching midsummer sun as temperatures soared to new highs in the Middle West. And it wasn't just horses and hogs that died. Many people died in that heat wave too. And the heat wasn't just in the United States. On the other side of the pond, the Manchester Guardian reported on 90-degree temperatures in Manchester, which is pretty incredible. It was so hot that summer in England that women started taking their clothing off. Modified nudism sweeps England, startling change in beach conventions. The British summer, now drawing to a close, has been remarkable for the sudden wave of modified nudism which has swept these islands. On the beaches, women have discarded pajama fashions in favor of shorts, and bathing costumes are tighter and skimpier than ever before. In some cases, they consist merely of trunks and a diminutive brassiere, with a plentiful expanse of bare skin in between. There are sunsuits to match made of gingham or linen with shorts not much more in dimension than a baby's rompers. But June 7, 1933 is just one day in history. Let's look at the overall trend of hot weather in the Midwest. This graph is the percent of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit at all Midwest stations, going back to 1895. You can see that they peaked in the 1930s, with the four hottest years being 1936, 1934, 1931, and 1933. 1901 was also extremely hot. 1988 was the last really hot summer in the Midwest, and that was when CO2 was still below 350 parts per million. Since CO2 has gone above 350 parts per million, the frequency of hot days has been very low. Overall, the frequency of hot days in the Midwest is down about 50% since the 19th century. That last graph was 90-degree days, and this graph is 95-degree days. As you can see, the trend is even stronger for 95-degree days. They hardly ever get them anymore in the Midwest, though they used to be quite common. Summers in the Midwest are much cooler now than they were prior to 1960. Unfortunately, there's not very many people around who remember that. Now let's look at what climate scientists are saying about heat in the Midwest. Global warming is a Midwest crisis in the making, Chicago Tribunes. Catastrophic heat waves. Sizzling Midwest previews a hotter future climate. Climate change is putting heat waves on steroids, says a prominent climate scientist. Heat waves, mosquito outbreaks, landslides, severe heat wave and drought grip the Midwest. Climate change will affect different regions of America. The frequency of major heat waves in the Midwest has increased over the last 6 decades. Let's read that last line again from the Environmental Defense Fund. The frequency of major heat waves in the Midwest has increased over the last 6 decades. Now let's compare that to the actual data. The data shows the exact opposite of what the Environmental Defense Fund is claiming. Over the last 6 decades, heat waves are way down from what they were prior to that. These graphs and maps from the National Climate Assessment confirm what I'm saying. The length of heat waves in the Midwest was much higher prior to 1960. The magnitude of heat waves in the United States was much higher prior to 1960. and the warmest temperature of the year was also much higher prior to 1960 in the United States. This map from the National Climate Assessment shows the change in warmest temperature of the year comparing 1986 to 2016 versus 1901 to 1960. Look at all those blue dots in Midwest. The map shows the Midwest peak temperatures have gotten much cooler than they were prior to 1960. Now let's go back and look at claims currently being made by climate scientists. Every one of them is the exact opposite of reality. Sizzling Midwest previews a hotter future climate. Climate change is putting heat waves on steroids, says prominent climate scientist. But the data in the National Climate Assessment says that simply isn't true. So why didn't my Google search turn up other climate scientists calling out the misinformation being posted by that one person? A lot of scientists worked on the National Climate Assessment and generated these graphs. They know that the claims being made by these scamsters in the press simply aren't true. But they remain silent because they know that their jobs, funding, and careers depend on keeping their mouth closed. An excellent example of this was my good friend Dr. Bill Gray, who was the world's leading tropical meteorologist and the guy who invented hurricane forecasting. Well, he spoke out against the fake consensus in 1993, got his funding cut off, and never got another penny out of the government. Dr. Gray had gotten funding from NOAA every year since he started his hurricane research in the 1960s. Then when Al Gore became vice president, he invited Dr. Gray to a global warming conference he was having. Dr. Gray said he would be happy to attend, but Gore should know that he's not a big fan of his global warming theories. And that was the end of government funding for the world's leading tropical meteorologist. Like in the days of Galileo, no dissent is permitted in climate science. When Al Gore became vice president in 1993, he went on a funding purge of skeptical scientists. That's a great way to maintain consensus. The playwright Upton Sinclair said, "It's very difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it." Very few people have the strength of character and integrity that Bill Gray had. And it's unfortunate because there have always been climate scamsters. This article is from the Monthly Weather Review from January 1907. Is not honesty the wisest policy? It is wrong to mutilate or suppress the record of an observation of a phenomenon of nature, but it's also wrong to make a bad use of the record. In fact, it is the misuse of meteorological data, not the observing or publishing, that constitutes a crime against the community. Observation and careful research are to be encouraged as useful. Misrepresentations are to be avoided as harmful. The independent press as the voice of the people should be not only vox populi but vox dei, repressing all cheats and hoaxes, defending the truth in the best interests of the whole nation as against the self-interest of a few. So who are the independent press in the year 2019? Well, it's bloggers like myself. The mainstream media, in cahoots with a few crooked climate scientists, are the ones who are mutilating and suppressing the records of nature. If the free press and peer review worked as they were supposed to, I wouldn't have to do what I'm doing. Even the EPA knows that heat waves used to be much worse in the United States than they have been in recent years. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.